Good morning, guys. Today's topic is going to be, it's not going to be quite about dating, but I think it's relevant. It's absolutely relevant because we can have the same issues whether you are interested in dating or interested in not dating. And something recently came up in a conversation with a coworker of mine, and she was expressing that she has trouble distinguishing platonic relationships from romantic relationships. And at first, when one hears that, at least when I did, I was like, well, how could that be? How could we make that mistake? Or how could we have trouble distinguishing that between the two? How could we really have trouble doing that? But there was something that I started remembering in my own experiences, and as she was sharing some of hers, it does become a little, it's not as apparent as maybe as we would think, especially if we're talking about dating someone versus being in a platonic relationship with someone, either friends or just acquaintances. Whatever, however you want to look at it. Of course, there's a big difference between a married person. But when we're talking about dating versus romantic versus platonic, this would be inclusive of the married as well, actually. So I will leave that there. And well, the question arose for me, well, what is the difference between platonic and romantic? Because first assumption is that there is a clear difference. But then the one question is, do certain actions distinguish the difference? For example, kissing or making out. Does that distinguish the difference between a romantic and a platonic relationship? Now, immediately we will say, well, of course, yes, that would show interest. Well, that's what we're assuming. We're assuming that shows interest. And to share one of my own experiences, it was one of my past relationships before I joined the Army, which has been about 5 years. Yeah, 5 years. 5 years ago. My ex from 5 years ago, before her and I were in a relationship, we had kissed. And I remember getting ready to ask her if she wanted to be in a relationship. But when I asked her, she said, "Oh, I thought we were already dating." And so you see, there was this big gap between our understandings. I took it as, even though we kissed, I took it as that we were not yet in a relationship. So that means not even yet in a romantic relationship. And my ex, she already took the action as we were already. That was the action that allowed the romantic relationship to exist. So when I was getting ready to ask that question, or when I had already asked that question, I realized that there was two different points of view at that moment. She was already thinking we were in a relationship because we kissed, and I was thinking that we were not yet because it wasn't well defined. It wasn't quite explicit about whether we were in a relationship or not. And I think some people would say, well, that's why we need boundaries, to be able to define between platonic relationships and romantic relationships. And I think that's true, but I don't think there's a universal boundary or set of boundaries. And again, the question would be, who's the authority for these boundaries? Well, I think the only authorities would be between you and the person that you are in relationship with, either platonically or romantically. Or maybe you don't really know which one it is, but it would be best for you both to define the boundaries of what it would mean and what you two desire. And I think this part is really important, because honestly, I don't think we can make a clear distinction between the two, especially when it comes to what people desire. And then there is this aspect of in the dating world where we use the term, well, I don't want you to play with me. I don't want you to play around with me. But I think what this really means is that I am setting a certain boundary, and I am defining a certain boundary, and I am desiring something specifically. And if you don't meet those specifications of what I am desiring, then you are playing with me. Right? That's how I interpret that term, that very popular term of, I don't want to be played with. I don't, there's people playing with me. And in the dating world, that's a very popular term. But I really want to change how that term is viewed, because it typically has a negative connotation. But actually, the only real playing of one person, of each other, is both of you not defining or understanding what you desire, or what you both desire. And this is where language, I think, is really important. And the words we use, because there's a lot of ambiguous words in the dating realm. Very popular ones: loyalty, honesty, respect. All these ambiguous terms. And I think it's really important that when you are engaging with someone or becoming interested in someone, that especially if you feel like it's getting serious, that you have to be able at one point be like, okay, well, what do you mean by loyalty? Like, what is your definition of loyalty? What is disloyalty to you? because I've heard these conversations between couples themselves about what they define as cheating and what they define as not cheating. And to give an example, some men view cheating as the physical act of having a sexual relationship with another woman. But on the other hand, I've also heard women say, well, cheating for me begins already with texting some other woman on the side with interest. For them, that is already cheating. So mental cheating is already cheating. And whether we disagree or agree with these opposites, and it doesn't matter. I'm not trying to make a distinguishment between like, oh, women only think of mental cheating and men only think of physical cheating. I would say this is just my typical observation. So if you've observed differently, that's fine. I'm just expressing my own observation for just an example that there are different interpretations of what cheating means. And it's good to understand and good to know that when we talk about loyalty and we talk about that, because it's a very common thing to be like, I don't want a cheater. I don't want someone to cheat on me. And we can both be in agreement about that, but our definitions can vary greatly about this. And that's why the dating world really is so violent with its own ambiguity and its preferences. You really have to have a dialectical relationship. There's no other way. There's really no other way that you can have it without having some friction. But the term being played with, that is a good term to start with, because we can all ask each other or the people that we're interested in or the platonic or relationships that we're in, what does this mean to you exactly? What does playing with you mean? And I've noticed that in my own experiences, there's a big distinction where, for example, when I am typically looking for someone, when I find the person I think would be a good fit, which is, usually my own mistake, because unconsciously I desire something else. If I'm going to use psychoanalytic language here, unconsciously I desire something else, but of course I don't know that until I practice some self-awareness and deep reflection on myself. But putting that aside, I would say that I desire a specific person or a specific set of values and so on, and I'll be like, okay, that's what I want. But then let's say I come across a partner that doesn't really know what she wants. And to me, that is always incompatible. But the real question comes, is it incompatible? Is it? Is that a more honest position, to not know what you want? Or is it also a position of disguise, where the person's saying that they don't know what they want, they're actually saying what they do want? And I think we can look at it that way as well. And then the person saying that they know what they want, they actually don't know what they want. And which is, again, it becomes which is a more honest position. And I know in my own experience, I have rooted out people maybe too quickly by doing this, for my own fear of wasting time, which I've talked about previously. The idea of wasting time, where it just didn't fit the narrative that I was looking for. But again, if we're being honest with ourselves, the idea of falling in love is a helpless position anyways. Once you fall in love, there's nothing about everything that you think you want, everything that you think you would desire, it gets really thrown out the window. It's a helpless position. There's nothing about falling in love that you can really prevent. You can be in denial all you want, but at the end of the day, you just find yourself there. You could say the dating world is probably the most irrational aspect of our lives, because of this act of looking to fall in love. And when we do fall in love, I mean, I've seen and I've met people that have tried to be as rational as they can in the dating world. And that's fine, and it seems to work until you actually come across somebody that breaks all those barriers, and that breaking is the falling in love with. But and I know I've kind of digressed here a little bit, but what I'm ultimately trying to say is that, again, the dating world, and even just between platonic and romantic, it's all very ambiguous, and it's not as well defined. The only thing that can be helped in some sense to define it is the dialectical relationship that you have with your partner, or platonic relationship, however you want to look at it. And because there is an influx of ambiguity of terminology that are thrown around in popular culture around dating, we have to really sit down with people and just have a conversation about what do you mean by a cheater? What is your definition of a cheater? What is your definition of loyalty? What are the situations that you define as disloyalty and cheating and being played with? Because I think when I do a scan of just the dating world as a single man, I see that we use the same terms, and you would think that we want the same things. And I'm always confused by, well, for the most part, a lot of people want the same things. But it's the same ambiguous terms that are not defined, are not well defined. And they vary from individual to individual. And I think that is a really important issue to address. And we have to pay attention to the language. It's the language that is very important in dating and in just other relationships in general. Because we often make the moral stance of, well, cheating is wrong. Well, I can agree with you, cheating is wrong, but how do you define that? And what are the circumstances that are cheating for you? And then we can have a conversation about what mine is and see if they can link up about how I view that. And of course, these are conversations that most people don't have. Maybe they're even uncomfortable situations and definitions. But there's also the danger of exaggerating our narrative or the romantic narratives, and that's also the danger between platonic and romantic. It's if someone says that, well, there is a clear line between platonic and romantic, well, it could be possible that you are actually exaggerating the romantic side. But then we don't want to minimize the romantic side too much, because then it becomes platonic. So there has to be something that distinguishes the two. But I think the only way that we can know this difference and live in this difference between the platonic and the romantic is that there has to be a dialectical, constant dialectical relation between the two partners. And I hope that I've been able to express this, and it's a rather simple idea, but it's a hard thing to do. Simple but hard. It's easy to fall in love. It's harder to stay in love. But anyways, I hope that I've made my points clear in terms of the things that I wanted to express, the issues that are around the dating world and the issues that are around avoiding the dating world, the influx of ambiguity of terms and how we define those terms, the language that we use with each other. This is all very important to look at what we mean by when we say I want a good partner. What do we mean by that? All right. That's enough for today. Take care, guys.